It was just another quiet evening in Crestwood, Alabama, a small town where nothing much ever happened. The sun had dipped below the horizon hours ago, leaving the sky painted in shades of deep purple and black. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Hayes drove along the winding country roads, humming softly to himself. He had spent the day visiting his parents, sharing stories over dinner, and now he was heading back home to his wife, Lisa, and their teenage daughter, Emma. It was supposed to be a peaceful night, but fate had other plans. As Daniel rounded a bend in the road, his car sputtered and then came to an abrupt halt. He frowned, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Not tonight," he muttered under his breath. He tried restarting the engine, but all he heard was a weak clicking sound. Sighing, he turned on the hazard lights and stepped out of the vehicle. The cool night air brushed against his face as he walked around to check under the hood. Maybe it was something simple, something he could fix right there by the roadside. The area was deserted save for the occasional chirping of crickets. The only source of light came from the blinking hazard signals reflecting off the pavement. As Daniel leaned over the engine, trying to figure out what was wrong, he noticed movement in his peripheral vision. Turning his head slightly, he saw headlights approaching from behind. A patrol car slowed down and pulled up a few feet away, its red and blue lights flashing ominously. Two officers stepped out, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other shorter but equally imposing. They wore standard police uniforms, complete with badges gleaming under the artificial glow of the patrol car's roof lights. The taller one, Deputy Ryan Clark, strode forward with a clipboard in hand, while the second officer, Megan Doyle, lingered near the car, her hand resting casually on her holster. "Evening, sir," Clark said, his voice carrying a tone that wasn't quite friendly. "What seems to be the problem here?" Daniel straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag he kept in the car. "My car broke down," he replied calmly. "I'm just checking if I can get it running again." Clark glanced at the vehicle and then back at Daniel. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Do you live around here?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already doubted the answer. "No, I don't," Daniel admitted. "I was visiting family nearby and was on my way home when this happened." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, extracting his military ID. Holding it up, he added, "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Hayes. I serve at Fort Rucker." For a brief moment, Clark's expression faltered, but it quickly hardened again. Instead of acknowledging the ID or even glancing at it, he took a step closer to Daniel. "You know, people around these parts tend to recognize faces," he said, his voice dripping with insinuation. "And yours doesn't look familiar." Daniel felt a flicker of unease but forced himself to remain calm. He had dealt with difficult situations before during his time in the military. This was no different, or so he told himself. "Like I said, I'm just passing through," he explained patiently. "I've been visiting my parents who live about 10 miles from here." Megan Doyle finally spoke up, her voice sharp and accusatory. "Why didn't you call for help instead of stopping here? Seems kinda strange, doesn't it?" Daniel blinked, taken aback by the question. "Strange? My car broke down unexpectedly. What else was I supposed to do?" Clark crossed his arms over his chest, his gaze fixed intently on Daniel. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at him, as if sizing him up, judging him not just as a stranded motorist, but as someone inherently suspicious. "You got any proof of that visit?" he demanded. "Proof?" Daniel thought incredulously. Was he seriously being interrogated over a car breakdown? Still, he kept his composure. "Look, I understand your job is to keep things safe around here," he said, evenly. "But I'm just a guy whose car stopped working. If you want, I can give you my parents' number. They'll confirm I was with them earlier today." Instead of easing the tension, Daniel's words seemed to irritate Clark further. "We don't need phone calls," he snapped. "We need answers, and we need 'em now." Megan shifted uncomfortably beside her partner, glancing between Daniel and Clark. She didn't say anything, but her grip on her holster tightened noticeably. Daniel noticed this and felt his stomach twist. Something wasn't right. These officers weren't behaving like professionals. They were acting like they'd already decided he was guilty of something. "All right," Daniel said slowly, holding up his hands in a gesture of cooperation. If you want answers, I'll give them. But I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just trying to get home to my family. Clark sneered, stepping even closer until he was practically looming over Daniel. Family, huh? That's what they all say, but how do we know you're not lying? How do we know you didn't steal that car or rob somebody before pulling over here? The accusation hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. He stared at Clark, disbelief etched across his face. Are you serious right now? He asked, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. I showed you my military ID. You think I'd risk everything I've worked for just to commit some random crime? You'd be surprised what people are capable of, Clark shot back, his tone laced with venom. Especially folks who don't belong here. That comment stung more than Daniel cared to admit. He clenched his fists, struggling to maintain control. Listen, he said firmly, I don't know what kind of assumptions you're making, but I'm telling the truth. I'm a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army. I've served this country for over 20 years. I deserve respect, not baseless accusations, Clark scoffed, shaking his head. Respect is earned, buddy, not handed out because someone wears a fancy uniform. Before Daniel could respond, Megan suddenly spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. Ryan, maybe we should just— Shut it, Doyle, Clark interrupted, cutting her off. Then turning back to Daniel, he barked, Keep your hands where I can see 'em. Daniel froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't moved since raising his hands earlier, yet Clark's command implied otherwise. My hands are right here, he said slowly, keeping his voice steady. I haven't touched anything. But Clark wasn't listening anymore. His hand drifted toward his gun, unsnapping the holster with deliberate slowness. Don't make me repeat myself, he growled. Hands. Where? I can see them. Panic surged through Daniel, but he forced himself to comply fully, raising his arms higher. Okay, he said quickly. Just relax. I'm not reaching for anything. Too late. In one swift motion, Clark drew his weapon and pointed it directly at Daniel. Megan followed suit, her own gun trained on him moments later. Time seemed to slow down as Daniel stood there, frozen in shock. His mind raced, searching for a way to defuse the situation, but every instinct screamed that this was spiraling out of control. Wait! Daniel shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. Please, there's no reason for this. I'm unarmed. Clark's finger tightened on the trigger. Unarmed or not, you're acting suspicious, he snarled, and we can't take chances. First shot rang out, shattering the stillness of the night. Daniel cried out as the bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him around. Pain exploded through his body, but he barely had time to process it before a second shot echoed through the air. This one struck him squarely in the abdomen, sending him crashing to the ground. Through a haze of agony, Daniel heard Megan shouting something indistinct, her voice tinged with panic. Clark loomed above him, his silhouette framed by the flashing lights of the patrol car. Blood pooled beneath Daniel as he struggled to breathe, each gasp feeling like fire in his lungs. Why? He managed to whisper, his vision blurring. Why did you? But Clark didn't answer. Instead, he holstered his gun and grabbed his radio, calling for backup. Megan knelt beside Daniel, hesitating for a moment before applying pressure to his wounds. Her hands trembled as she worked, guilt evident in her wide, frightened eyes. The last thing Daniel saw before darkness claimed him was the cold, indifferent glare of the stars above. The news of what happened to Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Hayes spread like wildfire. By morning, everyone in Crestwood, and soon the entire nation, knew about the shooting. Social media buzzed with outrage as videos taken by nearby security cameras surfaced online. The footage showed Daniel standing calmly by his car, his hands raised, when the officers suddenly opened fire without clear cause. People couldn't believe what they were seeing. In Washington, D.C., Secretary of Defense Patricia Monroe watched the video in stunned silence. Her face hardened as she replayed the clip over and over again. This wasn't just an attack on one man. It was an attack on everything the military stood for. Honor, duty, and respect. And Daniel Hayes wasn't just any soldier. He was a decorated officer who had served his country faithfully for over 2 decades. Monroe wasted no time. She called an emergency meeting with top Pentagon officials and issued a statement condemning the shooting. "This is unacceptable," she declared during a televised press conference later that day. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes risked his life for this nation, only to be shot down by those sworn to protect him. "We will not tolerate such injustice." Her words ignited a firestorm. Protesters gathered outside police stations across the country, holding signs demanding accountability. Hashtags like "Our Justice for Daniel" trended on social media platforms, drawing millions of posts. News outlets covered the story nonstop, interviewing experts, activists, and even Daniel's colleagues from the military. Meanwhile, back in Alabama, Daniel fought for his life in the hospital. His wife, Lisa, stayed by his side day and night, holding his hand and praying silently. Their teenage daughter, Emma, visited whenever she could, though it broke her heart to see her father hooked up to machines. Despite the grim circumstances, doctors remained cautiously optimistic. Daniel was strong, both physically and mentally, and he clung to life with every ounce of determination he had. While Daniel recovered, the investigation into the shooting began. Local authorities initially tried to defend the officers, claiming they acted out of fear for their safety. But the evidence told a different story. Special Agent Laura Simmons, a seasoned investigator with the FBI, took charge of the case. Known for her sharp instincts and relentless pursuit of justice, Simmons dove headfirst into uncovering the truth. Simmons started by reviewing the security footage frame by frame. It became clear that Daniel posed no threat to the officers. His hands were visible at all times, and he followed every command given to him. Yet, Deputy Ryan Clark and Officer Megan Doyle fired multiple shots within seconds. Why? That question drove Simmons forward. She also discovered troubling details about Clark and Doyle's past behavior. Records showed that both officers had been involved in several controversial incidents before, including accusations of racial profiling. None of those cases resulted in disciplinary action, but Simmons knew they painted a troubling picture. She dug deeper, obtaining access to their personal communications. What she found shocked even her. Text messages between Clark and Doyle revealed deeply racist attitudes. In one exchange, Clark joked about keeping the town clean by targeting outsiders who didn't fit in. Another message mocked Daniel, specifically referring to him as some uppity black guy trying to act important. These texts proved beyond doubt that the shooting wasn't a random act. It was fueled by prejudice. As the investigation unfolded, public pressure mounted. Protesters marched through the streets of Crestwood, chanting slogans and demanding answers. Some demonstrations turned violent, with angry crowds smashing windows and setting fires. Governor Thompson declared a state of emergency and deployed the National Guard to restore order. The once peaceful town now felt like a war zone. Clark and Doyle went into hiding after being placed on administrative leave. Their families faced backlash too. Protesters picketed outside their homes, holding up pictures of Daniel lying wounded on the ground. Anonymous threats poured in, forcing local authorities to provide them with temporary protection. Even so, neither officer appeared in public or gave interviews. They seemed to realize the tide was turning against them. Back in the hospital, Daniel slowly regained consciousness. His first moments awake were hazy, filled with pain and confusion. Lisa sat beside him, tears streaming down her face as she whispered reassurances. "You're going to be okay," she said softly. "We're here with you." When Daniel finally managed to speak, his voice was weak but resolute. "What happened?" he asked, struggling to piece together fragmented memories. Lisa hesitated, unsure how much to tell him. Finally, she decided honesty was best. "Those officers, they shot you," she explained gently. "But don't worry about that right now. Just focus on getting better." Daniel closed his eyes, processing her words. He remembered the flashing lights, the shouting, the searing pain. Anger bubbled inside him, but he pushed it aside. There would be time for anger later. For now, he needed to heal, not just for himself, but for his family. Word of Daniel's recovery brought hope to supporters nationwide. His commanding officer, General Harold Bennett, visited him in the hospital, bringing gifts from fellow soldiers. "You've always been a fighter, Hayes," Bennett said with a smile. "Keep fighting. We need you." Daniel nodded weakly, grateful for the support. He knew he wasn't alone in this battle. Countless people stood behind him, rallying for justice. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. How could someone sworn to serve and protect turn their weapon on him simply because of the color of his skin? Outside the hospital, Lisa and Emma joined protests, holding signs and speaking to reporters. Emma, usually shy and reserved, found her voice during this ordeal. She wrote letters to lawmakers, urging them to address systemic racism in law enforcement. Her words touched many hearts, inspiring others to take action. Despite the overwhelming support, challenges remained. Legal experts warned that prosecuting Clark and Doyle wouldn't be easy. Defense attorneys would likely argue that the officers acted under perceived threat, even if the evidence suggested otherwise. But Secretary Monroe vowed not to back down. "We will pursue justice at every level," she promised, "no matter how long it takes." As days turned into weeks, the case gained international attention. Human rights organizations condemned the shooting, calling it a blatant example of racial bias in policing. Celebrities used their platforms to amplify the message, while ordinary citizens organized fundraisers to support Daniel's medical expenses. The movement grew larger than anyone expected, transcending borders and uniting people from all walks of life. Through it all, Daniel remained a symbol of resilience. Though his body bore scars from the shooting, his spirit remained unbroken. From his hospital bed, he recorded a video message thanking everyone for their support. "I'm alive today because of you," he said, his voice steady despite the pain. "Together we can make sure something like this never happens again." His words resonated deeply, reigniting the call for change. As the nation awaited the outcome of the investigation, one thing was certain. Daniel Hayes' story had sparked a conversation that couldn't be ignored. The trial of Deputy Ryan Clark and Officer Megan Doyle began on a cold morning in February. The courtroom was packed with reporters, activists, and ordinary citizens eager to witness the proceedings. Outside, protesters gathered, holding signs that read, "Justice for Daniel" and "No more excuses." Inside, the air felt heavy with emotion, anger, sadness, hope, all swirling together as everyone waited for justice to unfold. Special Agent Laura Simmons led the prosecution's case. She stood confidently at the front of the room, her eyes scanning the jury before she began speaking. "This isn't just about one man," she said, her voice clear and steady. "It's about accountability, fairness, and ensuring that no one else has to suffer because of hatred disguised as authority." Simmons presented the security footage first. Frame by frame, she showed how Daniel Hayes had followed every command given by the officers, keeping his hands visible and remaining calm throughout the encounter. Then came the moment when Clark drew his weapon and fired without provocation. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as people watched the bullet strike Daniel, sending him collapsing to the ground. Next, Simmons introduced the text messages between Clark and Doyle. Projected onto a large screen, the racist comments were impossible to ignore. One message mocked Daniel specifically, calling him an uppity black guy who didn't belong in their town. Another joked about targeting outsiders based solely on their race. Each word added fuel to the fire of outrage building in the room. This wasn't a random act, Simmons emphasized, pointing to the screen. These officers acted out of prejudice, not fear. They saw Lieutenant Colonel Hayes not as a human being, but as someone unworthy of respect or dignity. Deputy Clark and Officer Doyle sat quietly at the defense table, their expressions unreadable. Their attorneys argued that the shooting was justified, claiming the officers believed Daniel posed a threat. But their arguments fell flat against the overwhelming evidence presented by Simmons. Witnesses testified about Daniel's character, describing him as a kind and dedicated family man who served his country honorably. Military colleagues praised his leadership skills and commitment to duty. Then it was time for Daniel himself to testify. Still recovering from his injuries, he appeared via video link from his home. Seated in a wheelchair, he looked pale and frail, yet his voice carried strength and conviction. As his face appeared on the large screen in the courtroom, the room fell silent. "Can you tell us what happened that night?" Simmons asked gently. Daniel took a deep breath before beginning. He recounted how his car broke down and how the officers approached him aggressively despite his attempts to explain the situation. His voice trembled slightly as he described the moment Clark raised his gun and fired. "I didn't understand why they shot me," he admitted. "All I wanted was to get home to my family." His testimony struck a chord with everyone present. Jurors wiped away tears, and even some members of the press struggled to maintain composure. When Daniel finished speaking, the courtroom erupted into applause, a rare occurrence quickly silenced by the judge's stern warning. Throughout the trial, Daniel's family remained a constant presence. Lisa sat in the front row, holding Emma's hand tightly. Both women listened intently, their faces etched with a mix of pain and determination. Emma, now more outspoken than ever, attended rallies outside the courthouse during breaks, urging people to keep fighting for justice. Outside the courtroom, tensions continued to simmer. Protesters clashed with counter-protesters who supported the officers, leading to scuffles and arrests. Law enforcement worked tirelessly to maintain order, but emotions ran high. Some businesses boarded up their windows, fearing further violence. Yet amid the chaos, there were moments of unity. Strangers joined hands in prayer vigils, vowing to stand together against racism and injustice. Back inside, the defense team tried to discredit the evidence, questioning the authenticity of the text messages and suggesting the security footage might have been altered. But Simmons dismantled each argument with precision, leaving little room for doubt. By the time closing statements rolled around, the verdict seemed almost inevitable. In her final remarks, Simmons addressed the jury directly. "You have the power to send a message today," she said. "A message that hate has no place in our society, especially among those sworn to protect us. Hold these officers accountable, not just for Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, but for every person who deserves to feel safe in their own community." When the jury retired to deliberate, the wait felt endless. Hours passed as families huddled together, activists held vigils, and reporters camped outside the courthouse prepared for whatever outcome lay ahead. Finally, after nearly 8 hours, the verdict was ready. As the courtroom reconvened, Daniel wheeled himself in, flanked by Lisa and Emma. The room buzzed with nervous energy as the foreman stood to deliver the decision. "On the charge of attempted murder," he announced, pausing for dramatic effect, "we find the defendants guilty." Cheers erupted, followed by sobs of relief. Daniel closed his eyes, exhaling deeply as if releasing a burden he'd carried for months. Lisa hugged Emma tightly, both crying tears of joy. Even Simmons allowed herself a small smile, knowing this victory was just the beginning of a larger fight for change. Judge Richard Thompson sentenced Clark and Doyle to life in prison without parole, citing the need to set an example. "Your actions betrayed the trust placed in you," he told them sternly, "and they will not be tolerated." For Daniel and his family, the verdict brought a sense of closure, but not complete peace. Healing would take time, and scars, both physical and emotional, would remain. Still, they found solace in knowing their struggle had sparked something bigger. Across the nation, conversations about police reform gained momentum. Lawmakers proposed new legislation aimed at addressing systemic racism within law enforcement, inspired in part by Daniel's story. As Daniel left the courthouse that day, surrounded by supporters chanting his name, he felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he knew he wasn't alone. Together, they could build a future where no one had to endure what he did. And that thought gave him the strength to keep moving forward. Months after the trial ended, life slowly began to return to some semblance of normalcy for Daniel Hayes and his family. Physically, Daniel was still healing. He walked with the help of a cane and endured daily physical therapy sessions to regain strength. Emotionally, however, he carried scars that would take much longer to fade. But instead of letting bitterness consume him, Daniel chose to channel his pain into something meaningful. He decided it was time to fight back, not with anger, but with action. With Lisa and Emma by his side, Daniel launched a non-profit organization called Bridges of Trust. Its mission was simple, yet profound: to foster understanding and cooperation between law enforcement agencies and marginalized communities. The idea came to him during his recovery when he realized how deep-rooted distrust had contributed to the tragedy he experienced. If change was going to happen, it needed to start with open dialogue and mutual respect. Daniel's first step was reaching out to leaders in both fields: police chiefs, community activists, educators, and even former officers who had left the force disillusioned by systemic issues. Together, they brainstormed ways to create programs that could bridge the gap. Ideas ranged from bias training workshops for police officers to mentorship initiatives pairing young people from underserved neighborhoods with role models in law enforcement. The response was overwhelming. People across the country rallied behind Daniel's cause, inspired by his courage and determination. Donations poured in, allowing Bridges of Trust to expand its reach beyond Alabama to other states grappling with similar challenges. Local chapters sprang up, each tailored to address specific needs within their communities. For the first time in months, Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. Meanwhile, Secretary of Defense Patricia Monroe continued pushing for reform at the federal level. She worked closely with Congress to draft legislation aimed at addressing racial bias in policing. One of the key proposals included mandatory de-escalation training for all law enforcement personnel, along with stricter oversight measures to ensure accountability. Monroe also advocated for the creation of an independent review board tasked with investigating incidents involving excessive force or misconduct. Daniel became a vocal supporter of these efforts, testifying before congressional committees and meeting with lawmakers to share his story. His presence added weight to the arguments, reminding everyone of the human cost of inaction. At one hearing, he held up a photo of himself lying in a hospital bed, tubes and wires attached to his body. "This is what happens when hatred goes unchecked," he said quietly. "But it doesn't have to be this way. We can do better." His words resonated deeply, prompting several legislators to champion the proposed reforms. Slowly but surely, progress began taking shape. Cities started implementing new policies, such as requiring officers to wear body cameras and establishing early warning systems to identify problematic behavior among personnel. While critics argued that these changes wouldn't solve everything, overnight supporters pointed out that every step forward mattered. Back home in Crestwood, things were changing too. The town that once seemed so divided found itself coming together in unexpected ways. Community meetings brought residents face to face with local police officers, fostering conversations that might never have happened otherwise. Some officers admitted feeling conflicted about their roles in the past, expressing a desire to rebuild trust. Others remained resistant, but even they couldn't ignore the growing demand for accountability. Emma played a crucial role in keeping the momentum going. Her letters to lawmakers had sparked widespread attention, earning her invitations to speak at events nationwide. Standing on stages alongside her father, she shared her perspective as a teenager, growing up in a world where fear often overshadowed hope. "I shouldn't have to worry about losing my dad because of someone else's prejudice," she told one crowd. "None of us should." Her speeches moved audiences to tears, galvanizing young people to join the movement. Schools began incorporating discussions about racism and social justice into their curriculums, encouraged by stories like Daniel's. Teachers reported seeing students engage more thoughtfully with these topics, asking questions and seeking solutions rather than simply accepting the status quo. As the months passed, Daniel grew stronger, not just physically, but emotionally as well. Speaking engagements kept him busy, taking him to cities across the country. Each stop reinforced his belief that change was possible. He met countless individuals working tirelessly to make their communities safer and more inclusive. Their dedication reminded him that he wasn't alone in this fight. One particularly memorable event took place in Chicago, where thousands gathered in an auditorium to hear Daniel speak. As he stood at the podium, leaning lightly on his cane, he looked out over the sea of faces. There were people of all ages, races, and backgrounds united by a shared vision of a better future. Behind him, a slideshow displayed photos documenting his journey. From the night of the shooting to his recovery and advocacy work today. "I didn't choose this path," Daniel began, his voice steady and clear. "It chose me, and while I wouldn't wish what happened to me on anyone, I'm grateful for the opportunity to turn tragedy into purpose. Together we're proving that hate doesn't have to win." Applause erupted throughout the room, echoing long after he finished speaking. That night, Daniel returned to his hotel feeling exhausted but fulfilled. Change wasn't easy, and there was still so much work to be done. But seeing the impact of his efforts gave him hope. Lisa often joked that Daniel's schedule was busier now than when he was serving in the military. Between running bridges of trust, advocating for policy changes, and speaking at events, he rarely had a moment to rest. Yet she supported him wholeheartedly, knowing how important this mission was to him. She handled logistics for the nonprofit, coordinating events and managing communications, while Emma helped design promotional materials and spread awareness on social media. Despite the challenges, the family remained close-knit, finding joy in small victories. Whether it was celebrating the launch of a new chapter in another state or receiving heartfelt messages from strangers touched by their story, they cherished every milestone. These moments reminded them why they kept pushing forward, even on days when the weight of the world felt unbearable. By the end of the year, Bridges of Trust had become a household name. News outlets hailed it as a beacon of hope, shining light on the possibility of reconciliation. Critics tried to dismiss it as idealistic or impractical, but the results spoke for themselves. Communities participating in its programs reported improved relations between residents and police, fewer incidents of misconduct, and increased transparency. For Daniel, the greatest reward came not in headlines or accolades, but in the quiet connections he made along the way. Conversations with officers willing to listen, hugs from families who saw themselves in his story, and letters from young people inspired to make a difference. All of these affirmed his belief in humanity's capacity for growth. As 2024 approached, Daniel reflected on how far they'd come since that fateful night in Crestwood. Justice had been served, reforms were underway, and a movement had taken root. But he knew the journey was far from over. Racism and inequality were deeply entrenched, problems requiring sustained effort to dismantle. Still, he refused to let cynicism creep in. Every life touched, every mind opened, and every heart changed mattered. Standing on stage at a rally one evening, surrounded by supporters chanting his name, Daniel allowed himself a rare moment of pride. "We've accomplished so much," he told the cheering crowd, "but our work isn't done. Let's keep building bridges until no one feels afraid anymore." And with that, he stepped down from the podium, ready to face whatever lay ahead. 1 year after the shooting, Crestwood had transformed. It wasn't perfect, the scars of division still lingered, but there was undeniable progress. People who once avoided eye contact now greeted each other warmly on the streets. Officers patrolled neighborhoods not as enforcers but as partners in safety, and at the heart of it all stood Daniel Hayes, a man whose resilience had sparked change far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The town organized a special event to mark the anniversary of the tragedy. They called it Unity Day, a celebration of how far they'd come and a reminder of the work left to do. At the center of the festivities was a newly unveiled monument, a simple yet powerful structure made of smooth stone. Engraved on its surface were words written by Emma, "In honor of those who fight for change." Beneath them was a dedication to Daniel, recognizing his courage and leadership. Daniel arrived at the park with Lisa and Emma, feeling both nervous and proud. Nervous because he knew eyes would be on him, and proud because this day represented everything he'd fought for. As they approached the monument, applause erupted from the crowd gathered around it. Families, police officers, teachers, activists, all came together under the golden glow of the setting sun. Mayor Thompson stepped forward to speak, her voice filled with emotion. "Today, we celebrate not just survival, but transformation," she said. Because of Lieutenant Colonel Hayes and his family, we've learned to listen, to understand, and to heal. Let this monument remind us that unity is possible when we choose compassion over fear. When it was Daniel's turn to address the crowd, he paused for a moment, taking in the sea of faces before him. Some were familiar, neighbors, friends, fellow advocates, while others were strangers touched by his story. He felt humbled by their presence, knowing that no single person could create change alone. It took everyone working together. "Thank you," he began, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "This isn't my victory. It's ours. Every person here has played a part in making our community stronger. We've shown that even in the darkest times, light can shine through if we let it." He went on to talk about the challenges they faced along the way, the protests, the debates, the moments of doubt, and how each obstacle brought them closer to understanding one another. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he said. "It takes patience, persistence, and most importantly, faith in each other. But look where we are today. Look at what we've built." As Daniel finished speaking, Emma stepped up beside him, holding a bouquet of flowers. Together, they placed the flowers at the base of the monument, a gesture symbolizing gratitude and hope. The crowd joined in, laying their own tokens, notes, small flags, photographs, at the foot of the structure until it was surrounded by mementos of love and solidarity. After the ceremony, people mingled freely, sharing stories and laughter. Police officers played catch with children, while elders swapped tales of growing up in Crestwood. Food trucks lined the edges of the park, offering dishes representing cultures from around the world. Music played softly in the background, blending harmoniously with the sounds of conversation and joy. For Daniel, seeing this harmony felt surreal. Just a year ago, he lay in a hospital bed, unsure if he'd ever walk again, or if justice would prevail. Now, standing tall among friends and allies, he realized how much strength he'd drawn from others. Lisa wrapped an arm around him, squeezing gently. "You did this," she whispered. "You gave them hope." But Daniel shook his head. "No," he replied softly. "We did this. All of us." Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel found himself sitting on a bench overlooking the park. Emma joined him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Do you think things will stay like this?" she asked quietly. Daniel smiled, gazing out at the peaceful scene before them. "I don't know," he admitted. "There will always be challenges, but I believe in people. I believe in their ability to learn, to grow, and to care for one another. As long as we keep talking, listening, and working together, we'll be okay." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she said. "You didn't just survive. You made something good come out of something terrible." Her words stayed with Daniel long after the festivities ended. That night, lying in bed beside Lisa, he reflected on everything they'd been through. The pain, the anger, the fear, they hadn't disappeared completely. But neither had the love, the determination, or the hope. Those emotions carried him forward, reminding him why he kept fighting. The following weeks brought more milestones. Bridges of Trust expanded internationally, partnering with organizations in Europe and Africa to tackle similar issues abroad. Schools adopted curriculums designed to teach empathy and conflict resolution, inspired by programs Daniel helped develop. Even Hollywood took notice, producing a documentary about his journey that reached audiences worldwide. Yet amid the accolades, Daniel remained grounded. He knew true success couldn't be measured in awards or headlines, but in lives changed. Every time someone told him their story, how his advocacy inspired them to speak up, to reach out, or to forgive, he felt grateful. Grateful for the second chance he'd been given, and for the opportunity to make a difference. By spring, Daniel decided it was time to step back from the spotlight. While he continued supporting Bridges of Trust, he handed over leadership responsibilities to a trusted colleague, allowing younger voices to guide the movement. His focus shifted to spending more time with Lisa and Emma, cherishing the moments they almost lost. One Saturday morning, the three of them visited the park where Unity Day had taken place. The monument stood proudly in the sunlight, surrounded by fresh flowers left by visitors. Daniel knelt down, running his fingers over the engraved words. "What do you think, Em?" he asked. "Did we do enough?" Emma smiled, kneeling beside him. "More than enough," she replied. "And if anyone tries to go backward, we'll remind them why we moved forward." Lisa laughed softly, joining them on the grass. "Well said," she teased, ruffling Emma's hair. "Now, how about some breakfast? I hear the cafe downtown makes amazing pancakes." As they walked away hand in hand, Daniel glanced back at the monument one last time. It wasn't just a tribute to him. It was a testament to the power of collective action. A reminder that, even in the face of hatred, kindness could prevail. And though the road ahead might twist and turn, he knew they'd face it together. Because that's what families did. That's what communities did. They built bridges, not walls, and crossed them side by side.